Most gardening advice assumes you have space. It assumes a yard, a border, a bed that stretches along a fence for 20 feet. It recommends plants in groups of 3 or 5, spaced at their mature spread, with room for a path between the sections. This is not the reality of most American gardens today, and it is especially not the reality of small urban lots, narrow side yards, apartment balconies, compact townhouse patios, and the kind of constrained outdoor spaces that many older gardeners are living with after downsizing from larger homes. Small space gardening has its own logic and its own priorities. Every plant has to earn its square footage. Every selection has to provide visual value across as many months as possible, and because replanting is a cost in money, in time, and in physical effort, every plant ideally comes back on its own, reliably, and performs better each year rather than requiring the whole process to begin again. That combination of compact habit, multi-season presence, and reliable perennial return is a specific set of criteria that eliminates most of the plants that fill garden center shelves in spring and points directly toward a much smaller group of genuinely underrated performers. Today I want to show you 7 of them. These are not the plants on the front table at the nursery. They are the plants that experienced small space gardeners return to again and again because they work, they last, and they get more beautiful with each season that passes, rather than more demanding. Plant 1 is Dianthus, specifically the perennial species Dianthus gratianopolitanus, the cheddar pink. This is one of the most overlooked perennials in American gardening, and the reason it is overlooked is that it does not create an immediate dramatic impact. What it does is create a consistent, building, cumulative presence that earns its place more completely each year. The foliage is a dense, low mat of silvery blue-green that stays attractive in all 4 seasons. In late spring and early summer, the mat is covered in intensely fragrant small pink flowers that have the true clove and spice fragrance of old-fashioned carnations. The bloom is not brief. A well-established cheddar pink can bloom for 6 weeks or more in its 3rd and 4th year, covering the mat so thoroughly that the foliage beneath is barely visible. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. Full sun. Excellent drainage. The kind of drainage you find in rocky or sandy soil where most plants would fail. This drought tolerance and drainage requirement is part of what makes it so useful in small spaces, because it thrives in exactly the conditions that are most common at the edges of paths, along walls, and in the gaps between paving stones where other plants refuse to establish. It spreads slowly and neatly, staying where you put it for years. It never needs staking, never needs deadheading for continued bloom, and never needs division unless you want more plants. Firewitch is the variety that has become most popular among perennial gardeners who discover it, for its deep magenta flowers and its particularly consistent blue-gray winter foliage. Bath's pink is softer in color and equally reliable. Both are available from specialty perennial nurseries and increasingly from better-stocked garden centers. The specific siting detail that determines whether a cheddar pink thrives or merely survives is drainage. In any soil that stays consistently moist or that puddles after heavy rain, the crown of the plant rots over winter regardless of how well it performed through summer. The solution in a small space is to site cheddar pinks on a gentle slope, at the top of a raised bed edge, along a wall where water drains away from the base, or in a container with aggressive drainage amendment. A mix of 50% potting soil and 50% coarse grit or perlite is the ideal growing medium where natural soil drainage is not perfect. Given appropriate drainage, a cheddar pink planted in spring can be expected to still be in the same spot, larger and more floriferous, 10 years later without any significant management intervention beyond the occasional division of the outermost runners to keep the clump tidy. Plant 2 is Veronicastrum virginicum, Culver's root. This plant earns its place in a small space through the specific quality that is hardest to find in genuinely compact plants, which is height without bulk. Veronicastrum grows to 4 to 6 feet in optimal conditions, but does so on narrow stems with a vertical orientation that takes up almost no horizontal space. The flowers are narrow candelabra-like spikes of small white, pale pink, or lavender blooms that rise from late July through September, providing late summer vertical accent at a time when the small garden most needs it. The plant self-supports on its narrow stems without staking, which is notable at that height. Hardy in zones 3 through 8, full sun to light shade, average to moist soil. It is a North American native that supports a significant range of native bee and butterfly species, particularly swallowtails, which find the flower spikes irresistible in late summer. The basal foliage is attractive from spring through fall, and the dried seed heads provide winter structure. For a narrow border beside a path or fence where a taller plant is needed but horizontal space is genuinely constrained, Veronicastrum is the specific solution that most gardeners have not encountered. Veronicastrum also provides a quality particularly valuable in small garden spaces, which is the ability to change the perceived scale of the planting without changing the actual footprint. A cluster of 3 Veronicastrum plants at the back of a narrow border creates the impression of a much deeper planting than the physical dimensions suggest, because the tall vertical flower spikes draw the eye upward and create a sense of spatial depth that horizontal planting cannot. This visual sleight of hand is one of the most practical tools in small space garden design, and Veronicastrum performs it more reliably and more beautifully than most other tall, narrow plants recommended for the same purpose in the same zones. Plant 3 is Geranium sanguineum, the bloody cranesbill. Do not let the name put you off. This is one of the most reliable, most compact, and most continuously attractive hardy geraniums available. And hardy geraniums as a group are already one of the most underrated perennial categories in American gardening. Geranium sanguineum forms a tidy mound of deeply cut foliage 12 to 15 inches tall and equally wide. It blooms from May through September, which at 4 months is one of the longest bloom seasons of any hardy perennial in the same size range. The flowers are a vivid magenta pink, a red flushed purple that reads as vivid color from a significant distance. Album is the white form, equally long blooming and useful for shaded or darker garden spaces. Striatum is the pale pink form with darker veining, more delicate in color than the species but equally vigorous. Hardy in zones 4 through 8, full sun to partial shade, average to dry soil where it is genuinely drought tolerant once established. It spreads by short rhizomes into a gradually expanding clump that never becomes aggressive. In autumn, the foliage turns vivid red and orange before going dormant, adding a final season of color contribution that most gardeners do not anticipate and are delighted by the first time they see it. The combination of spring through summer bloom, compact reliable habit, and autumn color makes Geranium sanguineum one of the most complete small space perennials available. The management practice that keeps Geranium sanguineum performing at its best through the long bloom season is a midsummer cutback after the first flush of flowers. In late June or early July, when the first bloom wave has finished and the plant is beginning to look slightly tired at the center, cutting the whole clump back by half with scissors or shears produces a fresh mound of new foliage within 2 weeks and a second flush of flowers in August and September that is often as generous as the first. This single intervention, taking about 5 minutes for a mature plant, extends the visual contribution of the plant by 2 full months and maintains the tidy, compact form that makes it appropriate for small spaces where a sprawling or open-centered plant becomes a problem rather than a feature. Plant 4 is Penstemon digitalis Husker Red. This Native American penstemon was the perennial plant of the year in 1996, was briefly fashionable in the late 1990s, and has since largely disappeared from mainstream garden center stock in a cycle of trendiness and neglect that says far more about how garden plants are marketed than about how they perform. It performs extraordinarily well. The deep wine red foliage that emerges in spring and maintains its color through the entire growing season is among the most vivid foliage contributions available from any perennial plant. In June and July, tall spikes of white to pale blush tubular flowers rise above the dark foliage. Hummingbirds visit those flowers with particular enthusiasm, and a penstemon in full bloom with hummingbirds working the spikes is one of the more unexpectedly dramatic events a small garden can produce. Hardy in zones 3 through 8, full sun to light shade, well-draining soil. It tolerates drought and poor soil with equanimity once established. In winter, the basal rosette of wine red leaves remains semi-evergreen in zones 6 and warmer, providing color at ground level when the garden is otherwise at its most dormant and bare. In zones 4 and 5, the rosette may flatten to the ground in hard freezes, but rebounds cleanly in spring. The plant is short-lived compared to many perennials, typically performing at its best for 3 to 5 years before declining, but it self-seeds reliably, and the self-seeded offspring, which vary somewhat in foliage color from the named parent, maintain the garden presence without any replanting effort from the gardener. The foliage color variation in self-seeded Penstemon digitalis offspring is one of the more interesting qualities of this plant's self-seeding behavior. The named Husker Red variety was selected for the deepest available wine red foliage color. Self-seeded offspring produce a range from deep red through bronze to green, and the variation within a self-seeded colony over several years creates a subtle visual diversity that looks more naturalistic than a uniform planting of the named variety. Some gardeners select out the green-leaved offspring to maintain the red foliage character. Others allow all variation to persist, and the result is a naturalistic mixed planting that improves with each successive generation. Plant 5 is Liriope muscari, lily turf. Liriope is one of those plants that experienced gardeners regard as indispensable, and that beginning gardeners frequently overlook because it does not produce a dramatic flower display in the way that annuals or showier perennials do. What it produces is four-season structural presence. The dense, arching grass-like foliage is evergreen in zone 6 and warmer, and semi-evergreen in zones 4 and 5. The purple flower spikes that appear in August and September are attractive and produce dark berries that persist through winter. The foliage itself, in the variegated varieties, is two-toned cream and green that functions as a light-amplifying element in shaded small spaces, hardy in zones 4 through 10, full sun to full shade, average to dry soil, drought-tolerant once established, virtually pest and disease-free. Liriope will grow in the dry shade under a tree where almost nothing else will survive, which makes it the specific solution for the most difficult planting situation in most small gardens. Big Blue produces the most vivid purple flower spikes. Variegata provides the cream-striped foliage that brightens shaded areas. Monroe White produces white flower spikes that read beautifully in low-light conditions. A single established Liriope clump in its third year is dense enough to fully suppress weeds in its footprint, which is a maintenance benefit that compounds in value over time. Liriope is also one of the most forgiving plants in terms of division and transplanting, which matters more in a small garden than in a large one. A mature Liriope clump can be divided at any time of year, including midsummer in full growth, replanted immediately without wilting and reestablished within 3 to 4 weeks. This resilience means that a single purchased plant can be divided progressively over several seasons to cover a significantly larger area than the original purchase would suggest. A gardener who buys 3 Liriope plants in spring and divides each one into 4 sections in autumn has 12 plants for the price of 3 within one growing season, each division reaching its mature size within 2 seasons. Plant 6 is Hemeroclus, the daylily, specifically the compact reblooming varieties that have been developed over the past 20 years, and that represent a fundamentally different plant from the one flush and done daylilies that gave the genus its average reputation. Stella d'Oro, the original compact rebloomer, produces golden yellow flowers from late spring through frost in a good year. Happy Returns produces soft yellow flowers with a similar extended bloom period. Purple d'Oro brings a deep, rich purple in the same compact reblooming format. These varieties grow to 12 to 18 inches in height, with a footprint of approximately the same dimensions, which makes them genuinely proportionate to small spaces, in a way that standard daylilies, which reach 3 feet or more and bloom for 3 weeks, are not. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, full sun to light shade, average to poor soil where they are remarkably self-sufficient. Dense foliage that suppresses weeds between bloom periods. Reliable division every 3 to 4 years that produces free additional plants. The one critical note is the toxicity of all parts of all daylily species to cats, including pollen contact with cat fur. For households or neighborhoods where cats have access to garden spaces, daylilies should be excluded from the container and garden lineup entirely. For households without this concern, the compact reblooming daylilies are among the most consistently productive, long-lived, and beautiful small-space perennials available. The division rhythm of compact reblooming daylilies determines long-term performance more than any other management practice. A clump divided every 3 to 4 years continues to rebloom reliably and produce the same flower quality as it did in its second and third year. A clump that is never divided gradually becomes congested at the center, individual fans competing for resources within the increasingly crowded root mass, and bloom quality declines noticeably in the 5th and 6th year. The division process itself, lifting the clump with a fork, separating the fans, discarding exhausted center portions, and replanting vigorous outer fans, takes perhaps 30 minutes for a mature plant, and constitutes the entire maintenance requirement for another 3 to 4 years of peak performance. Plant 7 is Epimedium, barrenwort. We end with this one deliberately because Epimedium is the most patient and most underestimated plant on the list, and its qualities are specifically suited to the gardener who wants to invest once, accept a slow start, and receive a genuinely extraordinary return over time. In its first year, epimedium looks modest. In its second year, it looks more interesting. By its third and fourth year, a well-established epimedium planting is one of the most beautiful ground covers available in any size garden, but particularly in the small, partially shaded spaces where it performs best. The heart-shaped leaves emerge in spring with bronze and red tones that shift to green through summer and return to bronze and red in autumn. In early spring, before the foliage fully emerges, small orchid-like flowers in white, yellow, pink, or deep purple appear on delicate, wiry stems. The combination of spring flowers, summer foliage, and autumn color across a plant that rarely exceeds 12 inches in height and that spreads slowly through rhizomes to form a weed, suppressing carpet makes epimedium the most complete four-season, small-space perennial available. Hardy in zones 4 through 9, partial to full shade. The dry shade tolerance of epimedium is the quality that separates it from most other attractive ground covers. It grows under trees, against north-facing walls, in the deep shade at the base of a staircase, in the places where gardeners regularly fail with other plants and give up on planting entirely. The varieties worth seeking specifically include Fronleiten for its vivid yellow spring flowers, Lilifee for its deep purple blooms, and Rose Queen for its pink flowers and reliable dense coverage. All require essentially no maintenance once established beyond cutting back the old foliage in late winter to reveal the spring flowers cleanly. The one additional detail about epimedium that accelerates its establishment from the typically slow first-year pace is thorough watering through the first growing season. Epimedium is genuinely drought-tolerant once its rhizome network is established, but in its first year, consistent moisture determines the establishment rate. A gardener who waters epimedium consistently through its first summer will have a noticeably more established planting by autumn than a gardener who relies on rainfall alone. The second-year establishment is dramatically faster with this initial support, and the third-year coverage that results is the reward for the first-year attention that the plant asked for, and then never asked for again. 7 plants, each one reliably perennial. Before the closing thought, one practical note about combining these 7 plants in a small space. They work together exceptionally well because they occupy different layers, different seasons, and different conditions simultaneously. Dianthus at the sunny path edge in full sun, Geranium sanguineum in the mid-border in sun to partial shade, Penstemon providing red foliage and summer flower spikes behind it, Veronicastrum at the back for late summer height without bulk, Liriope in the dry shade at the base of a wall or tree, Epimedium in the deeper shade where Liriope begins to look stressed, compact reblooming daylilies in any sunny open pocket that needs continuous color from late spring through frost. Each plant occupying a specific niche, each one providing value in the months when the others are less prominent, the 7 together creating a small garden that has something worth looking at in every month of the growing season. 7 plants, each one reliably perennial, each one compact and proportionate to small spaces, each one providing visual value across multiple seasons rather than a single brief peak, each one requiring dramatically less maintenance per season as it establishes, asking more from you in year 1 and less in every subsequent year until the relationship between the plant and the gardener is essentially one of mutual accommodation rather than constant intervention. This is what plant once, enjoy forever actually means in practice. Not that the plants require nothing, that they require less each year, build their presence each year, and earn their small square footage more completely each year. A small garden planted with these 7 species in the right conditions is a garden that improves with time, rather than requiring the same investment every spring to produce the same result. Drop a comment telling me which of these 7 plants you are adding to your small space this season and what your space looks like. I read every comment. Give this a thumbs up if it gave you plants worth looking for, and subscribe for practical perennial gardening content every single week.